This story starts way back in junior high with nothing but a cheap pencil and the blank backs of old printed papers. Back then, his parents kept throwing his art supplies away, so he'd end up drawing with sticks in the dirt or with rainwater on a concrete wall. He didn't have much freedom, but somehow he still found a way to enjoy it. That same drive followed him all the way here into this new world where he's still out sketching whatever nature throws at him. But to get why any of this is even possible, you have to go back to where it all started. It begins back home in a house lined with shelves of books and real, professional art supplies, the kind of setup he'd only ever dreamed about. He starts practicing with his brushes, flipping through reference manuals to sharpen his technique. Oil painting turns out to be tougher than he expected. He admits he just bought the materials and honestly has no clue yet how to get the colors to match what's in his head. While he's sitting at his easel, someone walks in and notices he's finally put together a full set of painting tools. It's the man the boy calls Sensei. He brings in a tray of food and asks if the kid's been skipping lunch again just to save money. Sensei points out the boy's been dumping his entire weekly allowance into art supplies and reminds him that people actually need to eat to survive. He offers up some leftover New Year's mochi for energy, saying he just wants to clear out the extra food someone sent over. Sensei also sets down a plate of fresh tomatoes, making sure the boy actually gets his vitamins. He mentions they had a great harvest this year and gives the boy credit for helping out. When the boy doesn't touch the plate, Sensei asks if he's holding back because he hates tomatoes. The boy looks at the plate and explains he actually wants to draw them first before eating them. Sensei laughs and says fine, he won't stop him, but he'd better eat them afterward so the food doesn't go to waste. He thinks about how people can end up neglecting basic stuff like eating when they're locked in on something in front of them, and admits he's guilty of the same thing. Sensei bets that not even death could stop this kid's passion for drawing, and the boy just nods along, still working. To him, Sensei feels like a completely different kind of adult than his parents or anyone at school, someone who never gets angry and even gives him a room where he can just be himself. He makes up his mind. Even if people try to stop him, yell at him, or throw his supplies away again, he's never giving up drawing for as long as he lives. That commitment to his art stays front and center for him, right there in his own little sanctuary. Then the boy wakes up, wondering when exactly he fell asleep. He's thinking about the dream he just had and how dreams are supposed to sort out your memories. Looking around at where he is, he realizes that memory was way too messy to be normal. He gets up and looks around the forest, totally thrown off by where he is and how foggy his memory feels, eventually wondering if someone carried him out here or if he sleepwalked. Something catches his eye and he lets out a breath of relief that at least he's still fully dressed. Then a bunch of sunflower-looking plants startle him, moving and reacting like they know he's there. He spots a giant mushroom and admits he's surrounded by plants he's never seen in his life. Panic starts creeping in as it hits him just how serious it is to wake up somewhere completely unknown. Staring up at the sky, he starts to wonder if he's actually ended up in another world entirely. He tries to calm himself down and decides he needs to act fast to make sure he survives whatever's coming. He starts thinking it through more rationally, taking note of the unfamiliar forest, the crisp air, and the strange, almost too pretty plants around him. He starts picking out plants he actually recognizes, like dandelions, violets, and something like snout beans scattered around. Then he spots weirder stuff too, stone-like mushrooms and flowers that seem to dance, and it reminds him of a field guide he studied once with Sensei. Even with all that knowledge, something about how unnaturally these plants are arranged really unsettles him. He decides his top priority is finding some kind of human settlement so he can get help. He heads off into the woods, picking his way carefully through the terrain, staying on guard for whatever's living out here. After a while, he stops and admits he hasn't found a single trace of civilization or anything useful at all. Hunger's really setting in now, and he's about to eat one of those dancing flowers when it actually talks, warning him it doesn't taste good. Completely stunned, he crouches down, still not able to wrap his head around the fact that his first conversation in this world was with a flower. As night falls, he settles down by a tree, thinking about how empty this forest feels and how wild it was that a flower just talked to him. His mind drifts back to his old life, back when he'd rush through schoolwork just to avoid getting in trouble so he'd have time to sketch on the side. Suddenly, he remembers something and starts digging through his stuff, pulling out a small notepad and a pencil. He looks at the papers stuffed in his jacket, remembering he'd grabbed them just in case he felt like sketching later. Sitting on the ground, he starts drawing, thinking back to how he used to sketch for hours straight, hunger and exhaustion be damned, until he finally finishes. What he ends up with is a sketch of a plate of mochi and a glass of dark liquid. He smiles at what he picked, realizing that even out here in a desperate situation, his instinct was to draw the food and tea he used to enjoy at Sensei's place. Then, out of nowhere, the paper starts to vibrate in his hands, catching him completely off guard. He thinks back to Sensei's comments about his obsession with drawing while the sketch keeps trembling, admitting that yeah, of course food was the first thing on his mind in a crisis. All of a sudden, the mochi and tea he drew pop right out of the page and turn into the real thing right in front of him. Startled by what just happened, he leans in and stares at the tree stump where an actual piece of mochi is now sitting. He can't believe what he's looking at, food that was just a drawing a second ago, and right on cue, his stomach growls loudly. Carefully, he picks up the mochi, feeling how soft and stretchy it is, just to confirm it's actually real. He can't make sense of this bizarre situation logically, but he figures he needs to eat regardless. He takes a bite, and honestly, the mochi tastes amazing. He follows it up with a sip of tea, surprised the strong flavor is a dead ringer for the barley tea Sensei used to brew for him. After finishing the meal, he briefly wonders if it's even safe to eat something that materialized out of thin air, then decides it's way too late to worry about that now. He notices the paper's gone blank again, and still not totally sure if he imagined the whole thing, decides to draw another round. As he finishes the next sketch, the food pops into existence again, this time with a bright flash of light. Confirming the taste is real, not just some illusion, he decides to have one last serving before calling it a night. Later, he wakes up groggy, rubbing his eyes, surprised he crashed out that hard. He gets up and looks around, realizing he must just passed out right there after eating too much, and can't help but laugh at his own simple-mindedness. Still blown away by the whole mochi thing, he decides to spend the rest of the day figuring out how it actually works, pushing thoughts of his old world aside for now. He wonders if this works on things besides mochi, and starts sketching a new item right there on the ground to test it out. After finishing a detailed drawing of 2 cherry tomatoes, he waits, but nothing happens. They don't materialize like the mochi did. He scratches his head, confused why it worked for the mochi but not for the tomatoes. He looks over a sketch of a pencil he just finished, and confirms that one didn't manifest either. Thinking about how tired his legs are from walking, he briefly considers sketching a bicycle, but gives up on that since it's too complicated, and draws a knife instead. The second he finishes, an actual knife pops out of the paper, catching him totally off guard. He's shocked to recognize the exact knife, one he used to borrow back at Sensei's place. He runs his finger along the blade, thinking about what connects the mochi, the tea, and now this knife, and why they worked when the tomatoes and pencil didn't. Looking at his pencil, he wonders if it comes down to his drawing skill, even though he sketched everything with the same technique. As evening rolls around, he draws another round of mochi, just to confirm it still works. And sure enough, it pops right out. While eating, he realizes he's going to need bedding for the night, and decides he needs to figure out this materialization thing fast. Something catches his eye, a small red fruit that's just appeared on the ground nearby. He picks it up and realizes his whole world's felt kind of colorless after spending half a day staring at nothing but black and white sketches. He studies the bright little fruit, the color practically jumping out compared to his flat, monochrome drawings. He's not sure where it even came from since nothing like it grows around here, but he decides to use it for his experiment anyway. He crushes the fruit and smears the red juice across his old sketch of the cherry tomatoes. The moment the color hits the drawing, the tomatoes react and pop right off the page. He catches the 2 tomatoes in his hand, thrilled that he finally cracked the missing piece. After confirming they taste real, he figures out that materialization needs a certain level of finish, and that anything that isn't naturally black or white needs color. He mulls over the finer details, working out that red tomatoes need red pigment, and wonders if his own skill or focus plays a role too. While eating, he realizes surviving on mochi alone isn't sustainable and finds himself craving edamame, though he knows making a variety of stuff with just a pencil won't be easy. Fired up by the freedom of this new world, he decides his goal is to collect as many colors as he can and to keep drawing no matter what. As night settles over the forest, a couple of animated flowers nearby seem to stir with the quiet. Tucked into a sheltered spot, he starts sketching something new, working with quick, focused strokes. A big blanket suddenly rustles its way out of the sketch, catching him completely completely off guard as it becomes real. He's relieved it's identical to the one back at Sensei's house and decides he'll draw a mattress tomorrow to save his aching back. The next day, he's carrying around a plain paper bag he made since he didn't have the energy to sketch something fancier. Motivated to start collecting materials for paint, he wonders if minerals like iron oxide or even simple flowers could work as color sources. His search pays off fast when he stumbles on a patch of bright red flowers growing nearby. Curious if it'll actually work, he starts grinding the petals against a rock to squeeze out the pigment. He rubs the red juice onto a big sketch of an apple he'd already drawn out on paper. To finish it off, he uses flower pollen for the yellow highlights, working the pigment in as he goes. The apple pops right off the page, and he celebrates seeing his color theory actually pay off. As he eats it, he realizes the process is really inefficient. It took him 3 hours just to squeeze out enough color from a handful of petals. A thought suddenly hits him, and he pauses, trying to figure out a better way to get his hands on color. He wonders if just drawing a tube of paint would work, and tests it out by dabbing a bit of petal juice onto a fresh sketch. The drawing starts to shake and glow as materialization kicks in for the paint tube. A real tube of paint pops right out, and even though the color's a little too pink, he's thrilled about how much easier this'll make things. Riding that win, he starts thinking about using berries or clay to widen his color range, while a few fresh tubes of paint sit ready on the ground. When he tries out the new paint, he's a little let down by how pale it looks. He checks over the different tubes, confused why the flower's bright red turned so dull and washed out once it was bottled up. He tries layering the dye to darken it, but figures out the object materializes the second the drawing counts as finished, so he can't add more color after that. He works out that finishing too slowly triggers early materialization, and realizes that even painting the color first still gives him a flat, unsatisfying shade. Frustrated with how dull everything's coming out, he runs through other sources of red before it hits him. There's one option he hasn't tried. With his arm bandaged and a proud grin on his face, he manages to make a tube of paint using his own blood. He admires the deep, rich red he pulled off, way better than anything he'd managed before. Even though he had to cut his own arm to get it, he figures it was worth the trade-off, and he's glad his bandages held up. With red sorted, he turns his focus to hunting down yellow and blue to round out his primary colors. His search leads him to a massive lily hidden deep in the trees. He realizes the giant flower could double as a bed, and it's got more than enough stamens to make a tube of yellow. With pollen covering his hands, he draws a simple glass of water in black and white to wash himself off. After the glass appears and he cleans up, it hits him. He's going to need a permanent water supply. He figures he can't keep drawing a single glass every time he's thirsty or dirty. He needs something that actually lasts. Noticing there's no river nearby, despite all this lush plant life, he realizes a steady water source is a must if he wants to keep using watercolors. Determined to fix that, he sets up his materials and decides he's going to draw a water source into existence. He starts scouting the forest, looking for a spot that would actually work for something like this. He finds a clearing among some rocks and figures it's the perfect place for his next creation. He sets his paper and paints on a flat stone and gets ready to start drawing. He works with total focus, going back and forth between pencil and eraser as he lays down the foundation for this bigger, more complex sketch. He keeps at it through the night and into the early morning. After a short rest, he wakes up relieved that his latest project is finally done. He looks over the finished landscape, a small spring ringed by stones. Realizing this is his first landscape piece in this world, he heads to the clearing, anxious to see what happens. He holds the drawing out over the rocky ground and waits for it to trigger. For a second, he worries it failed, but then the paper starts to shake and glow in his hands. The drawing disappears, and a real, glittering pool of water appears instantly in the rocky dip. He stares at the spring he just created, stepping closer, still not sure if what he's seeing is actually real. Out of nowhere, a wave of dizziness hits him hard and his vision blurs as he starts to lose consciousness. He wakes up later with a pounding headache, not sure if he fell asleep or actually passed out. Seeing the spring still there, he splashes cold water on his face, relieved it wasn't just a dream. After drinking his fill, he realizes he's barely eaten anything since yesterday and wonders if dehydration is what knocked him out. He figures materializing something that big must have drained his energy, but that thought gets cut off by his stomach growling. To deal deal with the hunger, he draws a magnifying glass and uses it to focus sunlight onto a sheet of black paper. Once he's got a fire going, he manifests a frying pan and a thick steak, deciding today's a meat day. He sets the meat cooking, watching it sizzle and brown over the flames. He digs in eagerly but quickly realizes something's missing: salt. He sketches a block of salt right away, licks it to check it's good, then shaves some over the rest of the meat. After the meal, he feels totally satisfied and decides he's going to keep manifesting meat for the next few days. Finally, he takes stock of his paint supplies, the different reds from flowers, clay, and his own blood, plus his pollen yellow. He goes through his colors, mostly reds, yellows, and browns pulled from stuff like clay and dirt, and realizes getting blue would let him mix pretty much anything else. He thinks about how to get his hands on blue, recalling it can come from lapis lazuli or even cow's blood, neither of which is easy to find out here. Turning to green, he studies a leaf and wonders if it could stand in for blue, but he notes that grinding leaves usually just turns brown. He plucks a leaf and holds it up to the light, admiring the pretty green and wishing he could bottle that exact shade. Looking for a workaround, he tries using lily nectar as glue and ends up putting together a little collage of an edamame bean on paper. He's enjoying the hands-on process, but while he's admiring his work, the paper suddenly starts to shake and glow. To his surprise, the collage actually triggers materialization, and a real object pops into existence right in front of him. He catches a small bean in his hand, realizing this ability even works on collages, which gets him thinking about a new idea right away. By sticking green leaf material straight onto a sketch of a paint tube, he manages to manifest a brand new tube of green paint. Excited by the discovery that gluing colors onto his drawings actually works, he starts hunting for more materials: petals, berry skins, anything colorful. He keeps at it until he's built up a whole shelf of color tubes, including a bright orange pulled from the wings of a dead butterfly. Then another wave of dizziness hits, and he decides to call it a day before he pushes himself too far again. While cooking up eggs and bacon over the fire, he eyes his new paints and starts planning his next steps. He's going to need pencils and real drawing paper. As he eats, he thinks about how rough it is being basically homeless out here, and finds himself really wanting a proper house to draw in. With a long list of things he still wants to make, he sits back down with his sketchbook and starts drawing out new ideas by the fire. He realizes he can actually manifest whatever he wants now, and the more he thinks about the possibilities, the happier he gets. Buzzing with motivation and excitement, he can't help but grin, looking over his growing pile of supplies. He starts sketching with a kind of joy he hasn't felt since he was a little kid, riding the thrill of this new power. He finishes his latest project and slings on a new shoulder bag, pretty satisfied with how it turned out. He admires the new dyed satchel, thinking it looks just like the one his teacher used to carry. Standing there with his sketchbook, he lets himself feel this new sense of freedom as he settles in for the day. He thinks about how good it feels to chase what he actually cares about without anyone stopping him, standing in front of a rough wooden frame. After pulling a tarp over the frame to finish his tent, he realizes this creative streak has probably always been part of who he is. He admits he used to bury those feelings back home, but now he just feels relief looking at everything he's managed to create. Settling into his new shelter, he lies down and decides he's done holding back. From now on, he's leaning all the way into it. He notices the tent material feels more like synthetic fiber than the wool he'd pictured, but honestly, he's just happy to finally have a place of his own. Feeling good about his progress, he settles in for the night and drifts off to sleep as darkness covers the forest. Deep into the night, the quiet of the campsite gets broken by a rustling sound near the water. A huge, shadowy shape with glowing white eyes steps out from the trees. The next morning, he's woken up by birds chirping and a loud splash nearby, so he peeks cautiously out of his tent. He's startled to find a massive bird standing right in front of his shelter. He freezes in shock, staring straight into one of the creature's giant eyes. He's overwhelmed by just how huge this thing is, as it stands calmly by the campsite, staring right back at him. With a sudden splash in the water, the giant bird spreads its wings and takes off. Watching it soar away, he's genuinely impressed by how majestic, how cool the whole thing looks. He walks over to check out the water and spots a huge feather floating on the surface, picking it up despite how cold the stream is. He's shocked by just how big the feather other is even bigger than he first thought. A familiar urge kicks in, the urge to draw just for the sake of it, not to manifest anything, and he lights up with fresh inspiration. But that excitement gets cut short when he catches a whiff of something off and starts sniffing his own clothes. Realizing he hasn't bathed once this whole week since arriving, he immediately starts sketching a wash basin and some soap to fix that. He checks his surroundings to make sure he's alone, then carefully steps into the freezing water to wash up. As he washes up, he loves feeling clean again but finds himself wishing for a hot soak, so a hot spring goes on his to-do list. Stepping back onto dry land, he realizes he really should keep his drinking water separate from what he uses for washing up. He turns his focus back to finding that giant bird but realizes his current outfit isn't going to cut it, so he quickly sketches a new set of clothes. Fully dressed now, he heads out into the forest, following the direction of the bird's calls, passing by some oddly smiling flowers. He keeps moving deeper into the woods, keeping up a steady pace as more of that strange plant life passes by. Along the way, he takes in all kinds of forest details: bright flowers, cracked eggshells scattered around, and some seriously large bugs. He collects a few colorful bits for paint, thinking about how there aren't many big animals around, and how bad it'd be if he ran into something like a bear. His search brings him to the base of a massive, sprawling tree that towers way over the rest of the forest. He spots a huge nest way up in the branches and figures the best way up is to draw himself a ladder. Once the ladder appears, he climbs a nearby tree to find a good spot to get a look at the nest. Reaching a high branch, he takes a moment to soak in the view of the forest canopy stretching out below him. For a second, he wonders if he can spot the edge of the forest from up here, then refocuses on checking out the nest. Peeking inside, he's surprised to find 3 huge eggs, all a striking, vivid blue. He's thrilled to spot the exact shade of blue he's been after, like it was pulled straight out of the sky. He really wants to turn that color into paint, but hesitates, worried he might damage the egg in the process. His thoughts get cut off when the huge bird comes back and locks eyes with him from just inches away. He freezes in shock as the giant creature towers over him and its nest. Terrified, he stumbles through a greeting and immediately starts apologizing for barging into its home. He rushes to explain he wasn't trying anything shady, he only touched the eggs because they were pretty, and promises he'll leave the nest right away. The massive bird suddenly nudges him deep into the soft padding of the nest, and he yelps as he falls backward. It keeps poking and prodding him with its beak, ignoring his cries of pain as he tries to shield himself from the hits. Pinned into a corner of the nest, he finds himself pressed right up against the eggs and notices a steady, rhythmic thumping coming from inside them. He watches, confused, as the bird suddenly takes off, leaving him alone to wonder why it stuck him so close to the eggs in the first place. His brief moment of peace ends when the bird comes back and lands in the nest, startling him all over again. It presents him with a piece of fruit and shoves it into his mouth, forcing him to fight to swallow the unexpected offering. He shudders as the intense flavor hits his tongue, realizing this weird fruit tastes exactly like an extremely spicy persimmon. Right after eating it, he starts feeling feverish and overheated, wondering if the fruit caused it as he lies down next to the eggs. The bird spreads its wings wide and gently lowers them over him, and there's something oddly comforting about it as he rests in the nest. As the bird flies off again, he starts sweating, and it clicks, maybe it wants him to use his own rising body heat to keep the eggs warm. He decides to help out, digging into his bag and pulling out a big piece of fabric. He wraps the cloth around himself and the eggs to keep them better insulated, though he's still pretty on edge about the whole situation. When the bird comes back with more food, he tries to wave off the nasty tasting fruit, but it forces him to eat it again anyway. With the bird watching closely, he reluctantly chews through the unpleasant meal, trying his best to keep it together. The bird eventually settles into the nest and falls asleep, leaving him sitting quietly, keeping watch over the eggs. Time passes as the sun goes down and both of them sleep through the night until he finally wakes up under a sky full of stars. He's immediately jolted to find the bird's massive face just inches from his own. Still feeling rough and sore, he watches the bird let out a chirp and take off into the sky again. It comes back soon after and drops a bundle of boots and dark clothing right on top of him, catching him completely off guard. yard. Confused at first, he asks what he's supposed to do with this stuff, then realizes the bird's actually lending him the clothes to wear. Once he's changed, he notices how much better he feels, though the bird interrupts him by chirping and offering yet another piece of fruit, making him groan at the thought of eating it again. Lying back down, he realizes the fruit hasn't really changed how he feels, but his attention snaps to the eggs when he feels them move beneath him. He watches closely as a clear cracking sound echoes through the nest. One of the shells is finally starting to break. A small chick pushes its way out of the shattered shell, letting out its first tiny chirps. He's delighted watching it hatch, and gets even more excited when a second chick joins in, finding the little things unbelievably cute. The night finally passes, and the sun comes up over the massive tree holding the nest. With all 3 eggs hatched now, he tells the giant bird it's time for him to head home. He hesitates for a second, like there's something else he wants to say, but the bird nudges a big piece of broken eggshell toward him instead. He asks if he can actually keep the shell and is happy when the bird chirps in agreement, realizing he also gets to keep the clothes it lent him. After waving goodbye to the birds, he suddenly freezes, remembering he completely forgot the whole reason he came out here in the first place. He decides to stick around just a bit longer to finish a drawing of the new chicks and their parent, but the bird interrupts by dangling another fruit in front of him. He takes a bite, and this time it's actually sweet and juicy, a total flip from the ones he'd had before. Looking at the bird, it clicks. The spicy fruits earlier were meant to raise his body heat for the incubation, which he finds a little terrifying in hindsight. He proudly holds up his sketchbook, showing off a detailed drawing of the whole bird family resting together in their nest. Heading back on his way, he thinks about how well things turned out, especially since he walked away with something more valuable than just a sketch. He pulls out a paint tube, grinning as he realizes he's made a rich blue color from the giant eggshell. He wonders what to paint first with his new blue, but stops when he spots a big feather lying near his feet. He checks his color chart, which keeps track of how he made each pigment: blood, flowers, stones, so he can always recreate a color if he ever loses a tube. Back at his tent, he admits he's wiped out after 2 nights spent in the nest, but he's still motivated now that he's finally got every color he needs. The area nearby turns out to be packed with fruit trees and plants: peach, pear, grapevines, all growing thick around a small pond. He admits he got a little carried away sketching all these plants, but he's amazed that every single one actually became real. He keeps working, painting wooden panels this time, but quickly realizes even a small section wipes him out, so he calls it quits for the day. Over the next several days, construction keeps moving forward as he puts together a bigger wooden structure. After 5 straight days of work, he finally finishes and stands in front of his completed wooden house. He steps inside, thrilled to have a real home now, complete with a desk and a bed. While resting, he thinks about how he's already spent half a month in this world and starts worrying about his parents, though he knows he needs to get back for the teacher who actually understood him. He stays set on finding a way home, since that teacher is the only adult who's ever really connected with him. He imagines his teacher would probably get a kick out of hearing about all this, though he still feels a pang of guilt about his family. He realizes he slept clean through until noon because the bed was just too comfortable, but he still feels totally recharged as he stretches and gets up. His morning gets interrupted when the big bird lands outside, chirping loudly. He greets it and asks if it's here for its daily bath in the spring, while he gets ready to start his laundry. After getting splashed by the bird, he ends up shivering and sneezing, forced to wrap himself in a cloth just to warm up. The bird approaches with some fabric in its beak, and he asks if it's brought him a new set of clothes. He puts on the soft white garment and finds it really comfortable, thanking the bird while already planning to wear the caped outfit during the day. He pauses, suddenly wondering where the bird could have even gotten human clothing from. After hanging his wet clothes out to dry, he shifts his focus to sketching a new spring. Since the first spring turned into a bird bath, he sketches a smaller version with a roof and pillars this time to keep the bird out. He brings the drawing to life, and a big marble fountain manifests right outside his door. He's completely wiped out from creating something that big, and notes that even though he practiced the marble texture, the grain still looks a little rough. He figures generating that much water is what really drains him, remembering he'd only made small glasses of tea or water before this. He thinks about his new semi-permanent spring. And while getting a continuous flow of water going was way harder than a single glass, he's glad he's finally got a bird-free source for his watercolors. The next morning, he wakes up and stretches, then gets startled by a sudden loud noise right outside his window. Looking out, he spots a new visitor drinking from the spring while the bird watches nearby, a majestic winged horse. He's completely stunned to realize the creature standing right outside his home is a legendary tenma. His amazement quickly turns into worry when he notices the creature's badly hurt, so he cautiously opens the door to check it out. Carrying his laundry, he slowly walks over to the spring, where the bird and the winged horse are gathered together. He spots a second wound on the horse's leg and figures it must be in serious pain, so he quickly changes clothes and grabs his supplies to help. Approaching carefully, he offers some ointment, explaining that his teacher used to use it for wounds, and asks if he can try it on the horse's leg. The horse abruptly turns its back and walks off, leaving him to wonder if it was basically just telling him to back off. The next morning, he wakes up and stares at the jars of ointment still sitting untouched on his nightstand. He looks outside and finds the horse's come back, but it's moving so stiffly from its injuries it can't even lower its head to graze, which worries him it'll starve. He decides to act, quickly sketching in his notebook, and manifests a patch of tall grass right in front of the creature's face. Now able to reach the food without straining its neck, the horse starts eating and looks a lot more comfortable. Relieved to see it eating, he starts wondering just how far his ability to materialize things that interact with living creatures actually goes. While it's distracted with its meal, he starts a new sketch, careful to stay out of its line of sight. He works carefully, adding detailed bandages onto a sketch of the horse's wing and lower leg. The finished drawing shows the winged horse fully treated, a medical wrap around its side and a bandage tied around its front leg. The bandages suddenly appear on its body and the horse neighs in shock while he watches closely from the window to see how it reacts. Once he sees it worked and the horse is calm, he feels a real sense of pride and heads out to check on both animals. As he finishes up his chores, he asks the horse if he can touch it, and after a moment it snorts and lets him pet its head. With its trust earned, he gently pets the injured horse while the big bird watches from nearby. He thinks about how the drawing worked even though he skipped some details, but figures he's still got a lot of practice ahead to really master this. His plans for practice take a sharp turn when another horse-like creature shows up, covered in wounds and missing part of its horn. He asks the first horse if it wants him to treat the new arrival too, noticing the second one's horn looks like it snapped clean off. Ready to help, he immediately starts a fresh sketch in his notebook. He wonders what could have caused such bad injuries, then decides to just materialize bandages over every wound and finishes the drawing. The creature lets out a startled neigh as the bandages and a prosthetic horn appear, and he asks how the new horn feels. Relieved it doesn't seem to mind the treatment, he decides it's finally time to wash up in the nearby spring. As he steps into the water, the horned creature makes a face like it's totally disgusted, and it makes him a little self-conscious. He apologizes but explains he really needed to clean up, remembering old stories about Kirin's disliking men, and asks if he can touch it. He slowly reaches out and asks if he can also touch the horn he just made for it. He's shocked to feel that the horn's actually warm, and when he pulls back the bandage, he realizes his drawings turned into a real, working horn. That discovery gets interrupted by a sudden, overwhelming wave that hits him, and he starts collapsing into the water. He's jolted back to consciousness by a loud chirp from the giant bird looking down at him. Realizing he'd fainted, he thanks the bird for keeping him warm, glad to see both mythical horses stuck around. He checks the horse's head and confirms an actual biological horn's grown back in, and wonders if that intense burst of materialization is what knocked him out. He realizes his abilities grown past just materializing things, it's actual restoration now, and decides he needs to fix the first horse's wings too. Despite the risk of fainting again, he sits down and gets started on a careful new sketch set on helping. He finishes the drawing, having poured all his focus into the tenma's wings, showing them fully healed. The restoration works, and the winged horse lets out an excited neigh as its wings heal completely, which he finds hugely satisfying. He's relieved to see the horse's wing moving properly again, but the effort of the restoration knocks him out cold, just like he figured it would. A week later, he sits thinking about just how much his situations changed, struggling to even find the words for his new reality. He notices the number of mythical creatures gathering around him, and the giant bird has grown a lot since he started this whole thing. He explains the horses kept inviting their injured friends over day after day, so he's been spending his time patching them up, even with the fainting spells from overusing his power. In return for his help, the creatures start bringing him valuable stuff, chunks of Kirin horn, Tenma feathers. Even though he's pretty excited by the rare gifts, he gets caught totally off guard when one of the creatures suddenly moves him. Before he knows it, he's soaring through the sky, riding on the back of a winged horse alongside a whole group of flying creatures. He's struck with pure awe, experiencing flight for the first time, finally taking in the full, breathtaking view of this unknown forest from way up high. Watching other mythical birds soar past, he thinks about just how majestic and beautiful the world looks from up here. Back on the ground, he enjoys the bond he's built with these smart creatures, getting ready to groom them and asking which one wants to go first. Almost a month after landing in this world, his peaceful routine gets interrupted when the horses suddenly react to something. A stranger stumbles into the clearing and is instantly shocked to find a whole gathering of Pegasus and unicorns all in one place. He stares back in silence, realizing this is the first time since arriving that he's run into another human being. Both of them freeze in mutual confusion, while the horses nearby snort and keep a close eye on the newcomer. Sensing the horses aren't happy, the stranger panics and throws his hands up to show he's not here to hurt anyone. The stranger cautiously steps closer and asks if the guy standing among all these mystical beasts is actually the spirit of this place. Startled and confused by the question, he loudly insists he's not any kind of spirit. The horses start neighing and moving around so much that the two of them can barely hear each other over the noise. As the horses poke at him with their horns, the stranger frantically apologizes for intruding and promises to leave, while he keeps shouting that he's not a spirit. The stranger admits he was genuinely thrown off and couldn't even tell what he was at first, leaving him to scream out one last time that he's just human. The stranger apologizes for the mix-up and points out that wandering into a sacred place could have gotten him killed if this guy had actually been a spirit. He introduces himself as Faye Blad Redguard, the second son of a noble family, and asks for the guy's name, so he finally tells him Togo and that he's from another world. Faye's caught off guard by the revelation, but takes the whole otherworld thing better than Togo expected. Getting excited, Faye mentions he's actually heard rumors about people crossing over from other worlds and welcomes the news enthusiastically. Faye formally welcomes Togo to the world, saying it's a real honor to run into a visitor right here in the Redguard family's forest. As they shake hands, Togo can't shake the feeling that Faye kind of reminds him of Sensei back home. While they rest together, Faye explains that his family's territory is mostly untamed forest, describing their land as a thin ring wrapped around this huge stretch of woods. Faye warns that this forest technically belongs to the spirits, who probably aren't fans of human visitors, meaning the two of them might be in real trouble. Faye quickly waves it off as a joke to ease Togo's nerves, which gets Togo asking why he even came into the forest in the first place. Shifting to a more serious tone, Faye reveals poachers have been sneaking into the forest, and it's gotten too bad to ignore anymore. Faye explains he's out here searching for the poachers targeting Pegasus feathers and unicorn horns, and asks Togo if he knows anything. Faye presses him for even the smallest lead, anything that could help track down the people responsible. Togo mentions he found an injured horse earlier, which makes Faye realize the animals actually trust the guy, though he rules Togo out as a suspect given how weak he looks. Faye points out Togo seems really uncomfortable around blood and conflict, and Togo quietly admits that's true. Faye sighs over his lack of leads, noting how hard it'll be to find the actual crime scene now that night's rolling in. Admitting he's basically been lost this whole time, Faye suddenly decides that running into Togo out here must be some kind of fate. Faye practically begs Togo to let him crash for the night, and later on, as the sun sets, Togo pulls out his sketchbook and starts drawing. Togo manifests a sofa, and Faye's completely stunned, immediately flopping down on it and gushing about how comfortable uncomfortable it is. Curious about the weird display, Faye asks where Togo learned this kind of magic since he's never seen anything like it. Togo admits he's not even sure what his own magic actually is, and when Faye asks if he can do anything else, Togo confirms this is literally his only trick. Faye asks if he can do basic stuff like making fire or water, but he's genuinely shocked when Togo admits he can't do even the simplest spells. Faye explains that not being able to do basic magic is really rare, and Togo starts realizing this world is way more magical than he expected, wishing he had those skills for his art. Togo slumps to the floor, clearly bummed out, and Faye asks what's wrong as the night rolls on. Togo just can't sleep with someone else in the room, especially with Faye's loud snoring echoing through the place. He thinks about sketching Faye to pass the time, but quickly decides that it'd be pretty messed up without asking first. He settles for drawing a carrot instead, glancing out at the injured animals, and quietly hoping the poacher situation gets sorted out. When morning comes, Togo starts making breakfast, slicing through a fresh carrot. Faye finds the carrots delicious, while the animals graze through the big pile Togo set out for them. Faye comments on the nice weather, saying the spirits don't seem angry today, which gets Togo asking what spirits actually are. Faye explains spirits are basically nature itself given form, protecting places like forests and springs, usually wary of humans but occasionally friendly to the ones they like. Faye adds that spirits are supposed to have massive magical power and often look strikingly beautiful, which gets Togo wondering if he's the one being mistaken for one. Getting ready to leave, Faye thanks Togo for being such a huge help during his stay. Faye vows to hunt down the poachers and give them what's coming, then waves a cheerful goodbye as he heads back into the forest. Out of nowhere, the big bird lands right in front of Togo and insists on handing him a folded piece of paper. Togo looks it over, but it's covered in strange writing and some huge number. Realizing he can't read the language, Togo decides to just hang onto the paper for now, while the bird chirps beside him. Togo asks the animals if they're hungry, but gets caught off guard when one of them grabs his hood and lifts him right into the air. It sets him down on the back of the Pegasus, which immediately takes off at a full sprint. As they race through the woods, Togo panics, shouting and asking where on earth it's taking him. Hanging on for dear life, Togo realizes they're moving way too fast and starts worrying about what happens if he gets thrown off. He steadies himself after getting dropped off, looking around in confusion until something suddenly leaves him wide-eyed with shock. Nearby, a group of men are roughly pinning down several winged horses with ropes, yelling at each other to hold them tighter. The men brag about their haul of wings and clean feathers, relieved they didn't get caught after a close call earlier. Falling to the ground in fear, Togo realizes these are the poachers, out here to sell these creatures for a fortune. When another Pegasus shows up, the poachers immediately chase after it too, determined to grab it and its wings. Togo watches the chaos unfold from a distance, wondering why the animal would drag him into something this dangerous. Staying hidden, Togo puts it together. The Tenma brought him here on purpose to show him what the poachers were doing. He pulls out his sketchbook, realizing the Tenmas were basically drawing the poachers' attention just to get him to step in. He remembers treating the horses' wounds before and understands now they want him to deal with these poachers. Things turn dangerous fast when the poachers run out of patience and decide to just cut the pinned animal down, sending Togo into a panic. Togo focuses hard on his sketch, tuning out the poachers' laughter and the animals' cries until the drawing's finally done. The finished sketch shows the whole group of men tied together with one thick rope. Suddenly, a real rope appears and wraps tightly around the confused poachers. The group panics, struggling against the ropes and shouting for someone to cut them loose. Togo rushes over to the injured animals, apologizing for taking so long and asking if they're able to walk. One of the tied-up men demands to know if Togo's the one who did this, and Togo just stares back with a grim, serious look. Togo leads the animals deeper into the woods, figuring it's finally safe enough to start treating their injuries. As one of the creatures cries out in pain, Togo keeps working on his sketches, telling it he's almost done. His hand shakes as he tells himself to just push through the strain a little longer. Despite how wrecked he clearly looks, he keeps going, already accepting that he's probably going to pass out the second he's done. Spotting two more injured horses, Togo decides to take the risk and draw both of them at the same time. Both Pegasi manifest successfully, letting out loud cries as they join the rest of the herd. Even though the drawing worked, Togo suddenly grabs his chest, gasping for air, hit by a toll way worse than anything he's felt before. As Togo collapses to the ground, gasping, a big man looms over him, taunting the kid for the trick he pulled pulled earlier. The man notices how attached the animals are to Togo and wonders if he's some kind of beast tamer, but Togo can only manage to beg the creatures to run. Ignoring him completely, the man grabs Togo by the head, saying a clean kid like him would fetch a good price. Before he can do anything else, a hard punch suddenly slams into his face, catching everyone off guard. A man named Redguard stands over the fallen poacher, demanding to know what's going on here, while Togo watches in shock. The poachers demand to know who this newcomer is, but Redguard ignores them completely, asking Togo if he's hurt. Togo tries to answer that he's fine, but his voice comes out weak and his vision starts fading. Exhaustion finally wins out, and Togo drops face first into the dirt, leaving Redguard yelling out for him. Sometime later, light starts filtering through a small window as Togo slowly comes back to consciousness. Togo finds himself lying in a bed, looking around the room in a daze, trying to piece together what happened. Hearing a familiar sound outside, he looks out the window and finds the whole herd of winged horses waiting for him and asks if they're all okay. He lets out a relieved breath while gently petting one of them, grateful they made it through safe. When Togo tries to sit up, he realizes he's got zero strength left and wonders exactly how long he's been out. Redguard walks in to check on him, and Togo's surprised to see the man who saved him standing right there. Redguard admits he was shocked to find Togo in that kind of danger and explains he chose to chase after the kid instead of the poachers. When Togo asks who actually brought him back, Redguard apologizes for barging into his house uninvited and mentions the Pegasi had originally tried to just leave him at a spring. Redguard reassures him the poachers are locked up in the town jail, though right now they're only being charged with trespassing. Redguard explains that since he didn't witness the actual poaching and the men claim they only wandered in, they can't be hit with a serious charge without more evidence, which leaves Togo pretty shaken. After mentioning the Tenmas only pulled through because Togo healed them, Redguard warns the poachers could walk if the evidence disappears, and Togo starts regretting that he blacked out. Redguard admits he was genuinely terrified when Togo went unconscious, since the kid didn't move at all for 3 straight days. Togo's stunned to hear how long he was out, and Redguard says he was honestly scared Togo was dead, since his position never changed the whole time. Redguard asks if Togo used some massive spell since his exhaustion reminds him of a friend who once cast something huge, and Togo just gives a sheepish apology for the scare. A Tenma uses its horn to offer Togo a peach, and Redguard figures the creatures are showing their thanks for what he did. Since Togo hasn't eaten in 3 days, Redguard urges him to dig in, and he's immediately blown away by how sweet the fruit is. While Togo wonders if the flavors somehow tied to the spirits, Redguard steers the conversation back to the poachers, insisting there has to be a way to nail them. Redguard explains that finding proof of the group trading Pegasus feathers or unicorn horns on the black market would finally let them take the criminals down. Formally introducing himself as Fey Blad Redguard, the man swears on his family name that he'll protect the peace of this forest for Togo. Redguard says they still need to find the hideout to secure any evidence, but he gets cut off when Togo pulls out a document and asks if he can read it. As he looks it over, Redguard's face goes pale, realizing Togo's already stumbled onto exactly what they've been looking for. Redguard shouts that this paper is solid proof of illegal trading, then gets confused and flustered when Togo explains a bird just handed it to him. Togo describes the messenger as a massive bird with a serious attitude, leaving Redguard silently trying to process that whole explanation. Redguard decides not to push it as long as they've got the evidence, though he's still a little unsatisfied with how they got it. Under the moonlight, Togo rests among the winged horses, realizing the anxious creatures don't want to let him go home. As he watches Redguard leave with the evidence, Togo wonders if the punishment will actually be enough, still a little suspicious about that mysterious bird's role in all this. Realizing a month's gone by in this strange world, Togo starts worrying about his high school attendance and whether he's about to lose his credits. He pictures the brutal schedule of cram school and makeup classes waiting for him, and eventually admits to himself that he honestly doesn't want to go back to his old world. He thinks about the one teacher he'd actually miss, but 2 days later his quiet gets broken when Redguard shows up at the house, calling out to him. Redguard announces they've caught all the poachers. The case is officially closed for now, and Togo lets out a long sigh of relief. Redguard thanks him for the help catching the criminals and pulling together the evidence, while the creatures nearby show how fond they are of the kid. Togo insists the real credit goes to the horse and the bird, but he's caught off guard when Redguard tries to offer him a physical show of gratitude. Redguard admits to himself that none of this would have happened if the boy hadn't been there to guide the creatures. Doubling down on his thanks, Redguard tells Togo it really was his help that made all the difference. When Redguard asks how he can repay him, Togo's visibly thrown off by the sudden offer of a reward. Redguard notices a sketch of a bracelet and explains Togo can basically get anything he wants through his art, throwing out ideas like a medal or land, both of which Togo immediately turns down. Redguard insists he'll provide whatever Togo wants to the best of his ability, prompting Togo to actually stop and think about what he wants. Togo looks at Redguard and simply asks for one thing: permission to live here. Amused that Togo's asking for so little, Redguard laughs and promises to bring it up with his father, though he tells him to think bigger next time. Redguard points out that if Togo can manifest things through drawing, he might actually be able to summon powerful creatures known as summoned beasts. When Togo admits he's got no clue what those even are, Redguard explains they're expensive magical creatures that humans can control. Redguard describes how a contract lets someone use these creatures for combat or transportation, though rare ones like dragons are especially hard to come by. Redguard mentions that the first generation of his family actually had a contract with a legendary red dragon, and says something like that's basically everyone's dream. After explaining how tricky magical compatibility can be, Redguard notices Togo's suddenly reacting differently and asks if he's gotten interested in the topic. Togo's eyes light up with excitement as he admits he was actually thinking about trying to draw a dragon himself. Redguard's stunned to realize the kid's way more excited about painting a dragon than actually having one, and figures out that Togo just genuinely loves drawing, plain and simple. A sudden heavy rain starts pouring down across the forest as the weather turns. A group of mysterious hooded figures moves through the downpour, their presence half hidden as something metallic, a weapon or a jewel, catches a glint of light among them. Watching the storm from his window, Togo realizes this is the first time he's seen rain since he got to this world. Looking for shelter from the heavy rain, Redguard knocks on the door and asks Togo for something to dry off with. As he wipes himself down, Redguard remarks on how sudden the downpour was, while Togo mentions he had to quickly draw a roof to keep the horses sheltered. Sitting together inside, Togo asks about the local weather patterns before Redguard asks if he can stay the night since the storm shows no sign of letting up. Redguard's amazed all over again by how Togo can create whole room extensions just by drawing, as he steps into a newly formed bedroom. Settling in, Redguard admits he's not a fan of rain when he's stuck outside in it, and asks Togo what he thinks of the weather. Togo explains he actually likes how quiet everything gets on rainy days, only to look over and find Redguard's already fast asleep. Sitting alone on the porch, Togo thinks about everything Redguard's done for him, from handling the poachers to getting him that formal residency letter. Despite their friendship, Togo realizes he barely knows the guy, wondering about his noble status and how he manages to visit so often when he lives so far away. His thoughts about Redguard handling the poachers alone get cut off by a loud, distressed neigh coming from the stables. Sensing something's wrong, Togo rushes toward the panicked animals to figure out what set them off. Peering out into the heavy rain, Togo's startled to see a hooded figure watching him with a sinister grin. He freezes on the spot as a group of 5 hooded figures step out of the storm to confront him. The lead figure stares him down with a menacing look, and the tension of the standoff hangs thick in the air. Togo demands to know who they are, right as one of the figures raises a glowing gem set into a cross-shaped artifact. A dark, thick liquid starts pouring out of the stone, rapidly taking shape into a huge, fanged creature. A massive serpent made entirely of water fully takes shape in the rain, and lets out a threatening hiss aimed right at Togo. Togo realizes he's staring down a giant water snake right as the hooded man orders the creature to attack. The water serpent lunges forward with brutal force, ripping through the air straight at its target. The creature's strike smashes right through the wooden stable, collapsing the whole structure as the terrified horses scatter for safety. Togo shouts out in panic for the animals, horrified to see one of them's already been hurt in the chaos. Togo recognizes the giant water snake as one of those summoned beasts Redguard told him about, while the hooded leader takes note of the strange kid standing out here in the rain. The man wonders out loud if the kid's some kind of beast tamer, seeing him with a unicorn and a pegasus at his side. But Togo ignores the question and just asks what they want from his animals. The stranger seems amused that Togo calls them horses and admits that for now, he's not actually after the pegasus or the unicorn. He mentions he'd happily take any offerings, then reveals their real target is Redguard's second son, which leaves Togo tense and silent before he lies and claims the man isn't here. Suddenly, a ring of water bursts out and rapidly wraps itself tight around Togo, catching him completely off guard as it binds his whole body. As the water tightens its grip, the man laughs off Togo's obvious lie, insisting he already knows their target is here. Togo tries to keep up the lie, claiming the man already left before the rain got bad, but the stranger just smiles and cranks up the pressure, making him scream out in pain. The man mocks him for it, suggesting Redguard clearly doesn't trust him, since he wouldn't be lying like this if he actually knew the noble's real plans. Sensing the danger, the unicorn suddenly charges the water barrier and slams it with its horn, sending the liquid construct splashing violently apart. The stranger tells Togo not to worry about someone who clearly doesn't trust him, then menacingly demands to know exactly where the man's hiding. A massive, serpent-like creature has him wrapped up tight in the rain while a group of cloaked figures look on, surrounded by winged and horned creatures. One of the men presses him about where Redguard's hiding, threatening to crush him from the inside if he doesn't talk. He can barely breathe as the creature's tail forces its way into his mouth, and it feels exactly like drowning. Out of nowhere, a man appears and orders the group to let him go right now. Stepping forward, the man asks if he's actually the target they've been hunting for. The man explains the noise woke him up, and the cloaked leader seems pleased he showed his face, while Togo realizes it's Redguard. The cloaked man clocks the intensity in Redguard's stare and asks if he's got some attachment to the kid, and Redguard calls him his benefactor. The leader suggests it'd be fun to just strangle the boy, but Redguard warns him to back off, claiming the forest spirits and creatures behind him won't stand for it. Laughing it off, the cloaked man admits the spirits are getting restless and figures they should avoid stirring up any more trouble than they need to. He orders Redguard to drop his weapons, quiet and slow, and Togo wonders where he's even hiding any as Redguard reaches for his accessories. Redguard obeys, pulling off his belt buckle, a ring, and a bracelet, and tossing them all aside. As the items sink into the water, the cloaked man compliments how fast he complied, while Redguard demands they take him instead of the kid. Without any warning, one of the cloaked figures slams Redguard across the face, calling him a useless little kid. The hit sends Redguard staggering back, while Togo struggles helplessly, still stuck under the water. In a sudden flash of memory, a smiling man tells someone named Togo that he never changes, not one bit. Sensei, as Togo calls him, asks if he's really still thinking about art at a time like this, and the boy's left completely confused. Togo snaps back to reality all at once, gasping as he realizes he's lying on a cold stone floor. Looking around, he realizes they've been moved somewhere new, and spots Redguard lying unconscious nearby. Togo rushes to his side and shakes him awake, and Redguard's first move is checking if Togo's okay. Groaning in pain, Redguard asks where they've been taken, and all Togo can tell him is that they're locked in some kind of prison cell. Inside the cell, Redguard apologizes for dragging Togo into this mess, but Togo waves it off, already suspecting these guys are tied to the poachers. Feeling like this is somehow his fault, Togo asks Redguard to just lay it all out, who he really is and what's actually going on. Redguard confirms these men are tied to the poachers, running Pegasus and unicorn parts on the black market. Realizing this is about revenge, Togo listens as Redguard admits he's had a target on his back ever since he blew their operation wide open. Redguard suddenly comes clean and tells Togo he was actually using him this whole time. He explains he needed a hideout to dodge the poachers' retaliation, and he'd deliberately gotten close to Togo just to have his place as a fallback. Togo argues Redguard genuinely helped him regardless, but Redguard insists he's weak and that all the real power belonged to his summoned beasts. Pointing at the accessories he threw into the spring earlier, Redguard reveals they had 4 fire spirits sealed inside them. Togo tries to picture Redguard riding through the forest on flaming spirits and wonders out loud if they're too hot to even touch. Redguard explains the fire spirits are basically useless on rainy days and admits he's one of those rare people who can't cast magic himself. Looking back, he admits he's never had a shred of talent for magic or swordsmanship, not since he was a kid. Redguard Redguard calls himself useless, just like people have always said, and he's clearly torn up about dragging Togo into all this. Despite all the self-doubt, he confidently promises he'll get Togo out of here and pulls out a small blade. Togo points out the cell lock looks way too solid to break, and Redguard explains their captors underestimated them. They never found the knife hidden in his boot. Redguard asks if Togo can conjure up a key, but with no reference or materials to work from, he produces a small flame in his hand instead. Togo's impressed to see actual fire pop up out of nowhere, but a flustered Redguard tells him to stop stirring. It's embarrassing. Focusing hard on the cell door, Redguard explains he's trying to melt the lock, admitting this tiny flicker of magic is basically his max output. Togo's skeptical that such a weak flame will actually get the job done, but he can tell Redguard's giving it everything he's got to get him out. Feeling for Redguard's situation, Togo starts scanning the cell walls for any other weak spots they could use. Redguard tells him about his family's history, a bloodline of monster tamers who once commanded the Red Dragon, pointing out the family crest stamped on his gear. Togo's fascinated by the dragon crest, which Redguard finds kind of funny, considering how impressed he is. Redguard admits that even though the dragon's their family symbol, nobody in his line has ever actually tamed one, which makes him feel pretty pathetic as he keeps working on the lock. Noticing how down he looks, Togo tries to cheer him up, telling him there's nothing wrong with dreaming about that kind of power. The moment gets cut off by footsteps closing in, and a panicked Redguard shoves the hidden blade into Togo's hand, telling him to hide it just as their captors show up. Three cloaked men storm into the cell with a lantern, demanding to know what the two of them are up to. The men are irritated to find the prisoners already work their ropes loose. Showing off his little flame, Redguard casually explains he burned through the ropes and asks if they're finally free to go, but the men make it clear they're actually here to interrogate them. The captors set out a tray of torture tools, demanding answers, while Redguard sarcastically asks if they'll at least let him leave safely. One of the men mocks Redguard's noble title, then grabs the cell lock and screams in pain when the residual heat from his earlier melting attempt burns his hand. As the guy drops the key in shock, Redguard seizes the opening and blasts fire straight into the men's faces, catching them totally off guard. Taking advantage of the chaos, Redguard lands a heavy kick on one of the blinded men to clear their path out. Redguard grabs the dropped key and gets the cell door open, shouting for Togo to run for his life. Their escape gets cut brutally short when a massive blade suddenly runs Redguard through from behind. Togo freezes in horror as blood sprays across the cell from that sudden, lethal strike. Redguard drops to the floor into a spreading pool of blood, gasping for breath, while Togo can't move, can't even react to what he's seeing. A massive creature towers over the fallen Redguard, who still tries to spit out a curse at his attacker, despite how bad his condition is. In a last desperate move, Redguard tries to hit the beast with one small burst of fire, but his strength is fading fast. Togo screams out in despair as a new figure steps into the blood-soaked cell, casually commenting on all the unnecessary noise they made. The man reveals himself as the leader and tells the dying Redguard he won't be finishing him off just yet. He wants him to suffer a while longer. Turning to a trembling Togo, the man says he might have a use for him down the line and mockingly promises the kid won't get hurt today. The man flashes Togo a sinister smile, telling him he could turn out useful, and promises he'll be treated well. As Togo shakes, the man warns him, behave, don't fight back, and he won't have to go through what his friend just did. The heavy cell door slams shut, leaving Togo trapped alone in the dark. Staring down at the pool of blood on the floor, Togo clenches his fist, desperately trying to figure out how he can possibly turn this around. Fear washes over him as he realizes staying quiet isn't going to spare him from the pain he's so scared of. A memory surfaces. A man in glasses once asked him if he'd really stop drawing, even with death staring him down. He also remembers Redguard's words, how much he genuinely loves what he does. Togo decides he's done staying silent and starts tracing his fingers through the blood, determined to find a way out even if the odds are next to nothing. Remembering Redguard telling him dreaming doesn't cost anything, Togo's expression hardens with a fresh wave of resolve. Noticing the blood on the floor is already soaked in, Togo pulls out the hidden blade, telling himself he has to keep going. Even scared, scared even if they take his tools away. Togo cuts into his own arm for more blood, declaring he won't stop drawing, not even if it costs him his life. Breathing hard and completely spent, he stares down at the floor and whispers that it's finally done. A massive glowing dragon sigil now covers the stone tiles, drawn entirely in his own blood. His heart starts racing while his whole body turns deathly cold, and he collapses to the ground from the blood loss. Even with his strength failing him, he refuses to let it all go to waste, right as the entire cell starts shaking and crumbling apart. A colossal dragon made of fire and stone bursts up through the floor, towering over him. The creature lets out a thunderous roar, its eyes blazing with intense light. Togo looks up at the beast and tells it to go help someone who shares its colors, someone who desperately needs saving. The dragon leans down and gives him a gentle lick before letting out another fierce cry. The massive creature smashes straight through the dungeon ceiling and takes off into the sky, leaving whoever's watching down there completely stunned. The colossal dragon dives straight into a brutal fight against a giant snake creature. The two beasts trade a barrage of powerful attacks that light up the whole area. Locked in and determined, the red dragon winds up for one final, decisive strike. With a massive impact, the dragon slams into its opponent with everything it's got. The snake creature gets completely obliterated in the explosion as the dragon lets out one last thunderous cry. Down in the dungeon, the men stare up in terror, screaming at each other to run. The dragon keeps roaring as it looms over the trembling men below, still in the ruins. Down on the floor, a weakened Togo watches it all unfold, letting out a faint laugh at the sight of the red dragon he made. Collapsing from exhaustion among the rubble, he thinks, even now, that drawing really is a joy. Sometime later, the scene shifts to a quiet room, sunlight streaming in through a window onto a bed. Togo slowly opens his eyes and hears a voice asking if he's just woken up. He looks over to find Redguard heavily bandaged and wearing an eye patch, asking if he's in any pain. Redguard lets out an overwhelming sigh of relief that Togo's finally awake, while the boy's still struggling just to get his body moving. After drinking some sweet fruit juice, Togo starts to come back to himself and asks where they even are right now. Redguard explains they're at his own home, and that he had Togo brought there to recover. Togo realizes Redguard's actually a noble, then quickly panics about how badly he's hurt, but Redguard just shrugs it off as a small price for surviving. Redguard tells him not to feel guilty. He's just genuinely relieved Togo made it out safe. Togo admits he feels the exact same way, and Redguard adds that his injuries were worth it, before telling him to check something out. Redguard proudly shows off a small red dragon, his brand new summoned beast, which greets Togo with a cheerful little cry. As the tiny dragon flies out the window, both of them are still completely floored that the massive creature actually became a permanent summon. Redguard recalls how the dragon turned the whole battle around, letting them take down the black market group and get out, while Togo lay unconscious in the ruins. Back in the present, Redguard looks at him and asks if he was really the one who drew that creature. Togo brushes it off, saying he just got swept up in the moment, but as Redguard thanks him, he notices the massive dragons shrunk down a lot. Redguard wonders if the dragon shrank because his own magic power as a contractor just isn't enough, right before a sudden knock at the door interrupts them. Two distinguished-looking men step into the room, visibly relieved to see Togo's finally awake. The older man introduces himself as Van Milio Redguard, Lord of the Territory and Faye's father, while the other identifies himself as Roseth, Faye's older brother. After Togo introduces himself, Roseth apologizes for all the trouble his younger brother caused, though Togo frantically insists he's the one who's actually responsible for the whole mess. Togo says he feels awful about their injuries, but Roseth clarifies they only made it back alive because of him. Looking Togo dead in the eye, Roseth stresses that without him stepping in, Faye probably wouldn't have survived. When Togo asks why nobody's mad at him, Van Milio explains that surviving is all that matters, and he's got no reason to be angry at the person who saved his son. The Lord takes Togo's hands and thanks him sincerely for waking up, genuinely grateful he's safe. A little overwhelmed by the warmth of it all, Togo listens as Redguard tells him to just focus on resting up for now. Togo's completely floored to learn he's actually been unconscious for 10 straight days. Finally understanding why his whole body felt like lead, Togo spends several more days recovering at the manor. Once he's feeling stronger, Togo starts getting ready to head back to the forest for his things, while Redguard warns him not to push himself too hard. Togo explains he's itching to get his art supplies back and start drawing again, which prompts Redguard to reveal something he managed to recover. Redguard activates a magical accessory, and a burst of flame and smoke fills the middle of the room. To Togo's surprise, two big fire wolves emerge from the smoke as Redguard introduces them as his new summoned beasts. Togo wonders how Redguard still got the accessory after throwing it away, and Redguard explains he went back to the forest to search for it while Togo was still asleep. Redguard mentions the jewelry was found resting on a leaf right at the forest entrance, and figures someone kind must found it and set it there for him. Togo smiles to himself, thinking he needs to find a way to thank whoever helped him out next chance he gets. Redguard suggests they take it easy and ride their summoned beasts through the manor grounds, where a bunch of mythical creatures make their home. As they move through the area, a group of horned horses suddenly comes rushing at Togo, catching him completely off guard. Redguard laughs at how popular Togo clearly is, watching the horses swarm around him, thrilled to see the kid up and about again after so long. Redguard figures Togo probably can't head home just yet and gets ready to go back to his own parents alone, but Togo quickly calls out for him to wait. Togo comes up to him with a specific favor in mind, explaining he'd really like to draw his portrait. The two head inside, where Togo sets up his art supplies and starts sketching Redguard as he sits for the portrait. Togo explains he wanted his first piece since waking up to be of Redguard, though the guy feels a little awkward getting drawn while he's still recovering from his injuries. As Togo works, a highly detailed, almost lifelike sketch of Redguard starts taking shape on the canvas. Redguard's amazed by how good the work looks and asks if Togo's actually trying to heal his injuries through the drawing, and Togo admits that's exactly the hope. Redguard suddenly asks to borrow pen and paper to jot down a quick message before fiddling with his earring. A tiny firebird manifests as Redguard explains he'd previously ordered a special medicine that could restore his damaged fingers. Togo's stunned to hear Redguard actually canceled that order because he trusts Togo's ability to heal him instead, especially after seeing him bring the dragon back to life. Redguard pats him on the head and tells him to have a little more confidence in himself, reaffirming just how much he believes in what Togo can do. Moved by the gesture, Togo keeps working as day fades into night, surrounded by his paints and brushes. The next day, Togo's still locked in on the portrait while Redguard keeps posing, both of them determined to see it through. Togo starts hitting a wall with the colors, frustrated that none of the paints he's got can capture Redguard's true appearance. A sudden scratching at the window interrupts them, and it turns out the little red dragon followed them all the way to the manor. The dragon climbs inside and nuzzles up against Redguard, and the distraction sparks a sudden, loud realization in Togo as he looks over his supplies. Redguard realizes Togo's finally found the missing color he needed, making a brand new paint from one of the red dragon's scales. Togo identifies the scale as the exact scarlet he needs for Redguard's eyes and immediately starts applying it to the canvas, while the man watches, waiting. The finished portrait shows Redguard in full health, his missing eye and damaged fingers completely restored, right there on the canvas. As Redguard realizes his real injuries are actually vanishing to match the painting, Togo suddenly hits his limit and starts to collapse from exhaustion. Redguard calls out in alarm as Togo loses consciousness, and the scene shifts to the quiet grounds outside the manor. Togo slowly comes back to himself some time later, feeling a strange sense of calm as he wakes. He finds himself resting in a hammock outside, surrounded by sleeping mythical creatures, and Redguard walks over to greet him with a sincere thank you. Togo notices his whole body feels weirdly light, and he's relieved to see Redguard's injuries are completely healed now. Redguard explains the Pegasus and Unicorn probably shared their magic with him while he slept, given how compatible they are, though he's still amazed by how far Togo keeps pushing his own limits. Eager to get moving, Redguard pulls Togo up onto a big summoned wolf he calls Faye, and announces they're heading straight to his family's home. As they race across the grounds, Redguard tells Togo that after everything they've survived together, other, stuff like social status and where they come from just doesn't matter anymore. Redguard formally declares they're best friends now and insists they drop all the formal talk between them. Genuinely moved, Togo can't help it, and the two of them share a laugh as they keep writing. Thinking it all over, Togo can barely believe it. He's tamed a red dragon, chased down his dream, and made a real friend all at once. Redguard tells him he's counting on him going forward and asks if he'd be up for drawing a portrait of his whole family next. Redguard mentions the last painting vanished the second the healing was done, leaving Togo staring at his hands, wondering what exactly his gift even is. He remembers being told once that he's got real talent for drawing, and it settles something in him, reminding him who he really is. With a fresh sense of purpose and a bright grin, Togo reaffirms just how much he loves drawing and how much he wants to keep at it. Arriving at their destination, Togo's met with an unbelievably warm welcome right at the entrance. Rufus says Shed already heard about what Togo did through a letter, while the man's frantically checking Redguard's restored fingers and eye, totally in disbelief. To celebrate their safe return and everything Togo did, a huge, lavish feast gets laid out for everyone at the table. The whole group gathers for breakfast. Togo's blown away by the quality of the food. The bread, the jam, the sausages, the stuffed eggs, all of it incredible. Digging in happily, Togo admits he's never had a breakfast this good in his whole life, and Redguard just watches him with a smile. Redguard teases him for being so locked in on the food, patting his head and telling him to keep eating since he usually doesn't get enough. When the man asks about his eating habits, Redguard reveals Togo tends to forget to eat entirely when he's drawing, sometimes surviving off just one piece of fruit. Seeing how much passion Togo's got, the man formally asks if he'd be interested in becoming the family's retained artist. Redguard explains that as a retained artist, Togo would work exclusively for them with all his living costs, activity funds, and materials fully covered. The man adds that living with them would mean someone's always looking out for him, making sure he doesn't neglect his health, and Togo's left completely stunned by the offer. Togo realizes they're offering to turn his drawing into an actual profession and asks for some time to think it over, while Redguard encourages him to seriously consider it. The scene shifts to the quiet mansion courtyard, where a fountain trickles away in the center of the garden. Togo sits alone by the water, worrying he might come off rude, even though he knows the offer's a genuine honor. Looking down, lost in thought, he starts sinking into a painful memory from his past, from a rainy day back home. In the memory, a younger Togo stands soaked in the rain outside an apartment until someone finally notices him through the door. A man with glasses is shocked to find him standing there and tells him not to scare him like that, quickly pulling him inside. Dry now and wearing borrowed clothes, Togo apologizes while the man tries to lighten things up with a joke before finally asking what actually happened. The man notices how upset he really is and asks him for the truth, and Togo quietly admits his things got thrown away. Togo starts crying as he lists everything that vanished from his house: his paints, his crayons, his sketchbooks, and the man reaches out to comfort him. The man, stunned to realize it was Togo's own parents who threw out every single one of his art supplies. Togo explains that even though his teachers praised him and pushed him toward art school, his family scolded him and told him not to get too happy about his talent. He remembers how his parents insisted he'd never make it in art, that his passion was a total waste, before deciding useless things just shouldn't exist and throwing everything he owned away. The man in the memory tells him there's actually two kinds of waste, a good kind and a bad kind. He explains that even something as pointless seeming as a walk in the rain still gives you something real: the feel of wet clothes, the glow of streetlights. Opening the curtains to the rain outside, the man insists these things are necessary for him, and Togo just stares back in awe. He compares the heart to the body, saying that just like the body needs food to survive, the heart needs its own kind of nourishment too. The man points out that society tends to call that kind of spiritual nourishment useless, but he can see that Togo's hungry for it. As Togo thinks about just how big his heart's appetite really is, the memory fades and he's back in the courtyard, clutching his chest. Faye suddenly walks up and startles him, asking why he's zoning out with his hand on his chest. After looking around for him, Faye comments on how nice the courtyard is, while Togo stays quiet, still a little conflicted. When Faye brings up the whole thing about his paintings becoming real, Togo laughs it off awkwardly, saying he should probably just turn down the job offer anyway. Faye tells him to speak his mind without holding back, but points out that Togo's lack of control over his ability is a real, genuine problem. Faye jokingly compares Togo's leaking magic to a kid who still wets the bed, something you've got to correct early on. Explaining that uncontrolled magic just naturally seeps out, Faye suggests they start training together in the garden. Togo asks if training will actually let him draw without everything popping into real life, and Faye confirms that's exactly the plan. Thrilled at the idea of drawing normal pictures that just stay on the page, Togo eagerly agrees to get started. Nearby, the massive creature stretches out peacefully in the grass while the two of them get ready to begin. Faye tells him step 1 is learning to actually feel his magic, and hands him a staff to see if he can sense power flowing out of his body. As the staff starts glowing, Togo's surprised to learn the thing he's holding is actually an educational toy meant for Bobbies. Faye's happy to see the light in the crystal shifting through different colors, a sign the magic's flowing correctly. Togo watches the light fade back into his body, while Faye explains the tool's whole purpose is to pull magic out and then draw it back in. Faye explains this whole exercise is meant to widen his awareness of magic, feeling it move from his hand out through his entire body. Togo concentrates hard while holding the little magic tool and starts to feel power stirring inside him. Togo excitedly confirms he can actually feel the magic now, and Faye decides to call it a day, with plans to pick training back up tomorrow. Later that night, Togo keeps practicing alone in his room and notices his sense of magical power is getting a lot sharper. He realizes magic exists outside of him too, and finds himself hoping he'll soon be able to fully control his own energy. The next day, Togo meets Faye out in the garden to move on to the next phase of training. Faye explains the next step is learning how to keep his magic from leaking out, and hands him a different tool that reacts the second he touches it. Faye explains the tool naturally lights up when held, but the real task is suppressing his power enough that it never turns on at all. Togo struggles with it, comparing the feeling to pushing against a heavy curtain, and Faye steps in to help steady his arm. As the light finally dims out, Faye tells him to hold that feeling, but Togo starts feeling this uncomfortable, restless pressure building up inside him. Togo describes just how overwhelming it feels to force his magic down like that, and Faye urges him to just hold on a little longer. The strain shows on his face as he groans, straining to keep his grip on the tool and hold everything in. Unable to hold it any longer, Togo shouts that he wants to stop, and Faye realizes he's hit his limit right as the magic surges out of control. Suddenly, a massive pillar of light bursts out of the tool, knocking both of them flat with the force of it. Faye watches in pure shock as the beam of light shoots high into the sky, stunned by just how huge the whole thing is. Togo's left breathless and shaken by the sudden burst of power he just let loose. Once the tool finally settles down, Faye admits to himself that Togo's power is way bigger than he expected, and it's going to be a real challenge to get it under control. Looking straight at him, Faye tells Togo flat out that he's carrying an extraordinary amount of magical power. Togo can only stare back, still trying to wrap his head around the size of that revelation.